Good day again, Suburban readers and Suburban viewers. Welcome to Suburban TV. And this show is called Beyond the Pages. And welcome to episode 9. And we talk a lot about politics on this show. We talk a lot about editorials. We have political guests. And certainly we've covered COVID to the point where I don't know what there's left to say. But one thing we haven't done is what's called, on the ground water cooler stories. Because you may be totally tired of all the statistics and the economics and everything else, but what really matters to you is what's happening in your lives, under your roofs. And that affects people more than anything. The fear of going out, if Erica Young was alive, we'd have Fear of Flying and be reading that book. But the interpersonal relationships and how they're getting strained, how people are getting desperate. Personally, I've covered 5 suicides. We have a rule, we don't write about it. But the relationship between man and wife, between couples that maybe are living together but aren't married, couples that aren't living under the same roof, the pressure on kids, the conjugal violence. We're hearing it everywhere. And I can't think of anybody better to talk about this than our guest today. Full disclosure, dear friend, brilliant guy. Stefan Bensoussan is a psychologist. His clinic is called Psy Santé, Psy Santé, very well known in the West Island. Published author, and really with his pulse on the community and on what people do. People are coming to him to talk about what is just blasting away at home. And it's really my pleasure to have Stefan with us today. Stefan, good morning. How are you?
Hey, Beryl. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure and an honor.
So I gave the intro. I get these calls anecdotally. I'm involved with the West Island Women's Shelter, so I know their calls are up. What is the main problem that you're hearing from people being under the same roof or not being under the same roof, but wanting to be? Is it the marriages? Is it the children? Is it the conjugal violence? What are you seeing out there?
Well, I'm seeing a mixed bag of things, to be honest. It's been quite a challenging situation. Last few months have been a lot of ups and downs for everybody, myself included, not knowing what to do, changing my business model from in-person to Zoom sessions or working from home remotely. But a lot of people going through a lot of different stuff. I think in beginning of April, end of March, beginning of April, there was a freeze. Everybody was frozen. Nobody was calling. Nobody wanted to come out. Nobody wanted to do anything. And we had no idea what was going on in the world. So we lost a lot of clientele actually during that period of time. And then people started to get used to the concept of being home and adjusting to a new world, a new reality. And now people are finally coming out and where the phone's ringing nonstop nowadays. So it's interesting how people are kind of feeling like there's all this pent up energy that's been going on. When you confine people for so many days, you tell them not to do something for a long time. They can obey for a little while, and then after a while, something's got to give, right? So the kids are home, they're not in school, there's no structure. Parents are trying to work from home by Zoom or whatever. The kids are trying to get parents' attention. The parents are caught between trying to be a good parent and not being able to be good enough and not being able to be there for the kids and yet being an effective employee or working as best as they can and feeling spread out. So the stress on that family is huge. The kids are acting up because they don't get their parents' attention. They see their parents, they want to have time with their parents, but the parents aren't available for them even though they see them. So little kids have trouble and they're acting out. They're having trouble with their siblings they're bickering and fighting. Parents have to set them up with a school or the Zoom thing. And it's really very stressful for parents at this time. Kids are acting out. Kids who already have anxiety or kids who already have issues with attention or ADHD, those kids are acting out the most because they're confined. They're in a house. They're used to having sports and activities and going out and doing things and extracurricular. Now they're stuck at home with their siblings and their family, and they're just reacting. So you can imagine the tension that builds up in a household with so much drama like that. So on top of that, you have couples that are not used to spending so much time together.
Are they liking it or not?
So some couples actually get better.
Grosso modo.
Absolutely.
I'm not hearing that they're drawing closer together. But you're the expert.
There's a few where they bring together. It's good for one of them sometimes, both of them sometimes, but most of the time we're seeing couples that are at each other's throats. They need that space from each other. And, it's fine if you go to work and you come home and you spend a few hours with each other, but when you're all the time together and already stressed, that's a recipe for major conflicts, anxiety and stuff like that. I have one couple that's pretty eccentric, where I have one woman who already has anxiety, and now she's developed a full-fledged paranoia of getting COVID. And she's not at high risk, she's in her late 30s, but still. So she wears a mask inside the house. She never leaves the house, but she wears the mask inside the house. Her husband has to wear the mask with her. When he goes out to buy groceries, because she won't go out, he goes out to buy groceries, he comes back, she self-isolates for 2 days. She doesn't want to see him just in case he caught something for the next few days. So these couples are at an all-time high level of tension and stress, and they don't know what to do. So as a result, I've seen a lot of couples call and say, we're going to be breaking up. How do we do this? How do we tell the kids? I've seen a lot of couples call me in emergency sessions. There's violence happening in the house. People are freaking out, and there's a lot of yelling, a lot of physical abuse actually starting now with the kids. We didn't see that as much before as it is now. But the stress level is really, really high.
Are people what are they finding out about themselves? That those aren't the people that they thought they were with? Is it a matter that they've realized they changed from who they met? Or is it a matter that people just have some kind of daydreams about where it's some perfect life that's not going to happen?
Well, it's interesting. I find that the ones who've coped the best are the average individual who tends to be creative and who can work with adversity and develop like resilient habits and be positive and see how can we make this work for us and think outside the box. Those who are very like rigid in their way of thinking are used to a certain way of doing things and like their habits and they like the structure, they can't cope. And they're having enormous amount of trouble. They're becoming much more pressured and they can't handle stress. So because they can't handle stress, their husbands or wives are seeing that and they don't know how to handle them either. So that increases the level of tension in the household, but each individual's level of stress is unmatched. I've never seen this in my 27 years of practice where there's a high level of stress and intensity that doesn't come down. Usually with some of the tools that we give them, it helps them to cope a little bit better and more effective. But when you coop them up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they can't leave and they're being told that the world is unsafe and dangerous, you better stay home or else, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster, right?
Are people finding that they just don't want to be with this person this much? Or are they finding that the other side, gee, I really depend on this person and I resent the fact that I depend on them?
There's a combination of both, right? So there's a sense of, I need this person to make me feel safe. So people who have what we call an insecurity attachment, let's say mom or dad, when they were younger, weren't always available for them emotionally for whatever reason. Now they become that much more insecure, that much more dependent on their spouse or partners. And when the spouse leaves or goes out, there's an anxiety about, will this person come back? What would happen if I get sick? What would happen if he gets sick or she gets sick? So that increases their level of emotional insecurity. So that's why those couples who are always together, they actually do better. But the couples where there's an avoidant attachment, where mom and dad, when they were growing up, felt like, do your own thing, I do my thing, you'll be okay. They grow up feeling a little bit more self-resilient, like I don't need anybody to make me feel okay. And now that they have to face each other and they have to work together, it's very crowding and they feel stuck. They feel like they can't escape. So that confinement.
And they also have to report to each other. It's kind of, I don't know if report is the right word, but it's like they feel they're under somebody's scrutiny. Normally somebody goes to work, they've got a few hours in the day to themselves.
Yes. And not to mention that I have a few couples who, they have infidelity issues, right? So they have secret affairs and things like that going on. Now with the confinement, they can't see their lovers. So there's a stress right there. As long as I can see my lover, I can do my thing and stay home, I'm okay. But now that I don't have that escape, I'm faced with whoever's home with me, and that's not always the most comfortable. So
And
there's a
what about
stress there.
what's happening with couples? We know people are getting tickets, or we're getting tickets for crossing
Right?
neighborhoods and
Yeah.
sitting in a car with their girlfriends, and they've been together 5 years, 10 years. You're not under the same roof. They give you a ticket. What's happening with those relationships, if anything? Are they like? Is this 3 months giving people a new kind of pace for their life, and they realize, you know what, it is what it is, and I can't see her, I can't see him, so it goes. Or are people making efforts just to keep together?
Again, I've seen both. Again, I've seen couples who are usually well adjusted and who found a way to kind of make this work. They'll start walking together because there's nothing else that they can do. They'll spend time doing yoga or activities together at home. So those kinds of couples tend to work through that and develop a new normal, and that actually increases their intimacy, we'll say, and their ability of trusting each other and grow stronger together. But I'm in the profession to help people who have issues, so I don't usually get a lot of those calls. But I do get a few calls from people who are just like, they just can't stand each other anymore. So there's a hard number of separations and divorces happening. I have a friend of mine who's a notary, and she goes, she's never seen so many breakups. So she's mediating all these separations, and then she sends them to me to help them work through
Perfect,
them.
because you have to straighten them out.
Well, they need a little bit of support, right? I mean, there's all kinds of situations. I have even one couple where there's a husband and wife who separated last year, and they were happy having separated, and the kids were finally adjusted. But now, because of COVID, they don't feel safe having the kids travel from one house to the other. So the ex-husband moved in with the ex-wife, and now they're still living together under the same roof for the benefit of the kids. Like, imagine living with your ex in the same house for 3 months nonstop, 24/7. It's tension.
You mentioned before that it's not the same. Like you have to deal with a lot of kids who are victims of all this
Right.
by Zoom, and it's not the same. It's important to have that human contact, right? It's important to be able to look at somebody, reach out a hand if they're crying. How does it change your practice? How does it change you being able to reach people without that human contact?
So, for the most part, with adults who are used to being somewhat independent and functional,
And
the Zoom
distance.
session has been okay. We've kind of worked through it, and some people initially don't like it, but eventually they kind of like it. I find it actually quite effective, and it's become quite convenient for me, for clients. So that's been good. But the kids and the teens have had more trouble with it. The little ones, for example, when they come in, we do some play therapy, we do arts and crafts, and we do activities with them. We can't do that anymore on Zoom. It doesn't work. Their attention span is so short that a few minutes over Zoom and then they're gone. They're out of the room. They can't sit and look at a screen for so long. They can when it's a game, but when it's a therapist, they don't necessarily want to stay, right? So that's been challenging. So we've seen a loss of clients in terms of children. Our pediatric population has diminished. Doesn't mean that their need isn't there, but so we're seeing the parents working with us alone on Zoom, but not so much the kids. The teens as well. The problem with the teens is that they're at home with their parents, and usually they're stressed because of the parents, and they come in to see us in a private setting that's confidential and quiet. Well, now they've lost that privacy. They're home, and they hide in the closet sometimes to talk to us, and they're still just careful about what they say because they're afraid that someone is overhearing them. So
I know the method is one-on-one, but with Zoom, with couples, with adults, for example, do you ever bring two on at the same time and say,
yeah,
"Look,
for
guys,
sure.
you're making each other crazy. Let's have it out here before it gets violent."
Absolutely. That's worked actually quite well. As long as they can both sit on the same couch and we can see them on one screen, that's fine. A couple of times I've had two, they each have their own screens and we're working with them. So that helps. It's certainly not the same as in person, obviously, but it's definitely better than nothing, right? And giving them, the kind of practice that I do is more skills-based training. So giving them tools and ways to kind of navigate through stress in life is something that they like. So it's a hands-on, it's a practical approach. Obviously I'm listening, but I'm not just sitting back and paying attention. I'm also participating and sharing and giving. And I think that psychoeducational approach seems to be most effective for those types of people. The
When does the
psychoanalytic
violence
stuff
start?
may be more difficult.
When does the violence start? Did the conjugal violence, the increase in conjugal violence that we're hearing from shelters, did it start at the beginning or like 2-3 weeks into it, a month into it?
I would say about a month into it, when people are used to having a little bit of space together, like they're going on vacation for the long weekend, they're together. But eventually, when you can't leave, you can't escape, you're 24/7 with the same person. There's a high level of stress. There's a job loss. The kids are acting out. Everything's kind of happening at once. So that took a few weeks to kind of express itself.
Percolate.
And percolate, exactly. And people have a little bit of patience, but not super long. So it wasn't long before we started to get those kinds of cases. I've had to call youth protection on one family actually because there was just too much going on. That was pretty scary. So the kids were obviously at risk, and there was a dangerous situation. So the level of intensity has increased. I think the problems were already there from the get-go, but when parents have their own jobs and they have their own routines, you don't see it as often. It's that confinement. And also, don't forget, the government's telling everybody, don't leave the house, don't do this, you can't go here, you can't do that. People don't like that. People don't like to be told what to do or not to do. It limits their sense of freedom. And every time we get limited in our freedom, it's kind of like a father figure, a parental figure that's telling you, an authority figure saying you can't. And what do we do when an authority tells us you can't? We rebel. You can obey for a little bit, but at some point there's something that snaps in our brain and says, fuck you, I want to do my own thing, I'm going to do what I have to do, and I'm going to stand out, and I want to go to work, and I want to do this. And that's when we see people breaking rules, or if they can't break the rules, then they break heads, right?
Steph, we've talked about spouses and how they relate to each other, or partners percolating. But how is their reaction? Let's say you've got a couple, normal parents, no stress, but they've got 2 or 3 kids at home. And they're suddenly seeing their kids constantly, and they may be going, what the hell did we do with these self-absorbed little monsters? Is that happening? Like, are parents seeing their kids under a new magnifying glass, and they're seeing the self-absorption of this generation and the sense of entitlement, and are they getting really angry? That kind of stress between, let's say, teenagers and their parents?
That's a great question. Just last week, I had to remind some parents that these are extraordinary times, that your kids are actually pretty good and that you are excellent parents. And they were feeling really bad because these kids were acting out, and they had limited amounts of abilities to support these kids because these kids were bouncing off the walls and hurting each other, and there was so much yelling and screaming in the house, and the parents felt like they weren't good enough, they were doing something wrong. So it was a lot about reassurance and saying, hey, let's calm down a little bit, let's just understand that these are, like I said, extraordinary times, and they're doing the best they can, and you're doing the best that they can. But for sure, it kind of makes you feel like I'm not an effective parent. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my teaching methods? And maybe I should be tougher on them. Maybe I should be easier on them. Maybe I've done something wrong. What's wrong with me that my kids are acting out like that?
Are you getting calls from people, either themselves or people around them, who are concerned about suicides?
Yes.
I don't know, somebody who's had a job, laid off, weeks at home, they're worrying about the mortgage payments, they're worrying about there's just not enough money, never mind the $2,000. Are you getting calls from people who are concerned about their loved ones who may be suicidal? And what sparks those calls? What do they see in their behavior of their partners, of their husbands, of their wives, of their friends, that would spark a call to you to say, Steph, this guy's got to go, or this woman has to be talked to?
Well, what I've seen, and it kind of correlates with what the literature is telling us recently, statistics, is that the 2 most affected populations are teens and seniors in terms of feeling high levels of depression and suicidal risks. So we're getting parents calling us really concerned about their kids, saying, I don't want to live anymore. I can't take this. This is this is not a life for me. It's too hard for me. I can't see my friends. I can't do anything. They want to go back to school. Even if they hated school, they want to go back
Right.
to school.
For the
And they
socialization.
can't. Right. They can't see anything, can't do anything. And so the teens are acting out, and a few of them have attempted. We've had to intervene in a couple of situations to stop that. And seniors, being the isolation, the alone, the being alone, they can't go out. They're afraid anything they're going to do, they're going to catch it. And they was telling, someone was telling me I have a 2-week life expectancy if I get COVID. Like, and then so there's a high level of fear. They can see their loved ones. Loved ones want to see them, they can't. They're stuck in a senior's home or an apartment, something in a house, and they can't see their loved ones. They can't do anything. So they're saying, well, I've lived my life, but if this is what I have to continue living with, like, why? What's the point? Let me just get out of here.
As Martin Luther King said, longevity has its place, but it's the quality of your living that's important. Otherwise,
absolutely, they've lost that sense of meaning.
It's interesting that you say the ones you've seen on the suicide risk are seniors and younger people. Now, I can't name them, but I've covered is the wrong word because we don't write about it, but I've been present after the fact at 5 suicides. All 5, and that's just me. So all 5 have been working men. One left a note to his wife and 2 kids saying, I'm worth more dead than alive. Another was actually somebody who was a senior, but liked to work and had. So what about that working population? And is it hitting men more than women? This feeling that I have no worth anymore. I'm not working, I have no worth.
Definitely men are hit harder from this, I think, from what I've seen, than women. When men are definitely identified by the kind of work that they do. Their identity is tied into their self-esteem. So if they're working, they're doing something, they're accomplishing something, they feel good about themselves, their value, they're bringing home money, they're supporting their family. If you take him away from his job and you take away from his livelihood and he can't support his home, he's useless in his mind, right? And so he feels this incredible pressure, and it's an internal pressure. It's not necessarily one that's brought on by his family, but it's an internal pressure, feeling like I'm useless, I can't do anything, what am I here for? This is going to be too hard of a mountain to climb. I'm never going to be able to overcome this. And they often have predisposing depressive symptoms to begin with, and then you add this high level of pressure, and that can bring them to the breaking point.
What I'm hearing from you is what I've been hearing from the doctors in the hospitals, is that this isolation, we won't litigate the necessity, but that this isolation is actually causing in the hospitals new manifestations and increases in medical conditions, physical conditions. And what I'm hearing from you is that this is causing an increase in psychological conditions.
I think the psychological conditions are going to long outweigh the physical conditions. I think there's going to be major repercussions in terms of obesity. People have gained a lot of weight. People have eaten badly.
And sorry to interrupt, but what the doctors are telling me in the hospitals are, it's not just the age of people who are dying. The second biggest group are the extremely obese.
Yeah,
that's a major causal factor.
And there are already people who are sedentary, they're not moving around much, and now they're home, so it's even more sedentary, and they're still eating the same amount and probably poorer quality foods because they're not getting out to the markets and buying fresh produce, let's say. And as a result, they're just getting worse. But also, even the regular population who is more or less fit and active, when you're home for 2.5 months, you lose your shape, right? You lose your physical well-being. Your body wears down. You get more tired, more fatigued.
Well, not you and I, but anyway, I get the point.
Of course, we still have to be creative and get exercise, but those who have remained sedentary have had a lot of trouble. And those are going to have, in my mind, there's going to be some, when you're not exercising long enough, that can lower your dopamine levels, lowers your serotonin levels. It induces depression. So if people haven't been active during this time, there's going to be physical effects, but the emotional effects of being confined and stressed and stuck are going to outweigh that. And then on top of that, those who've lost jobs, for instance, it's going to take a while for people to bounce back from this.
I want to ask you a and this has been wonderful. You've really covered every issue. This is what people are talking about, not just in the West Island, all over. I think, people listen to this are going to feel a lot better. At least they're going to know what to reflect on in what they've done and who they've hurt, and even if they've hurt themselves. But let me ask you a material question. We talked about how people call you. Now, West Island, and I've written about this enough times, there's a general impression it's wealthy, it's whatever. But we know 20% are living below the poverty line. We know that COVID also, to control COVID, is much more difficult in denser populations. So what is happening, if you know anecdotally, or in people in the poor areas of the West Island who have these pressures you've discussed and more, because they're living in a physically small space, there's no land, there's no backyard, there's just their apartment. Do you hear from them, and how do they get help?
So there's one family that I'm working with who have been severely impacted by this confinement. Both parties lost their jobs, husband, wife, 2 young kids living at home in a small apartment. There was already issues before that. The wife was depressed and highly anxious and suicidal. The husband wasn't very supportive. She got to the point where she went to her breaking point, and she was about to commit suicide. I said, no, that's not an option. Let's find other options. And so she ended up having to go to a crisis center to kind of, hide a little bit for 2 weeks and escape her stress and her family. And now she's recontemplating, separation and moving forward and what she can do. But in the end, her husband's been home and he's been abusive with the kids. So now the mother-in-law had to step in. The kids had to go to the mother-in-law. They didn't even know about CERB. They had no idea, because they're they have less access to computer skills. They didn't know what the government can offer in terms of support. So that kind of stress was difficult. The husband, who ended up wanting or needing psychological help, couldn't afford it. Community CLSCs, CUSSs weren't kind of taking on new patients. They weren't necessarily available on Zoom. So those who had limited computer access are screwed, because they have no idea what's going on in the world. They just hear what's on the radio and on TV, and it's scary. So unfortunately, the people who are underneath the poverty line are the most affected in my mind. And unfortunately, we have limited resources for them.
Steph, we're fighting the clock a little bit. I want to give the last word to you. What words of advice do you want to give to people listening in, both in terms of their reaction to COVID, but also in terms of their personal relationships with their significant others, their children, anybody else?
So thank you for that. First
These
of all,
Stefan Bensoussan's consignes, not the government.
It's really important every day to create a routine. Create a routine, getting up in the morning around the same time. Pretend you're going to work. Do something that is regular for yourself, whether it's going out for a walk or a bike ride, or now that the weather is better, go out, do things outdoors. You can't be in the house all the time. You need to get out. Secondly, reach out to community, reach out to your friends, reach out to family, whether it's social distancing, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's by phone, but you can't be alone. Like, reach out. And I know some people are uncomfortable with reaching out support, but you need to do it. Social support is one of the buffers of mental health issues. So being alone causes a lot of problems in the short run, and you might not notice it. You might feel a little bit tired, a little bit demotivated. You might be sleeping a little bit more. Those are signs of an early signs of depression. So don't wait till the depression hits so hard that you have no choice but to go see a physician and get medicine. Like, do something about it. Physical activity is really key. Every day you need to be moving, whether it's walking or yoga or stretching or swimming or whatever works for you. Physical activity is really necessary. Talk about your stuff, whether it's with a friend or a counselor or a family member, but talking about what you're going through is important. But then don't watch the news all the day. Sometimes watching the news nonstop. I have families that are COVID obsessed, and they have the news on 24/7, watching the numbers rise, and their level of paranoia has gone through the roof. Turn off the TV and go do something more productive. Listen to the news if you have to 1 hour a day, but then go do something. Physical activity, moving, taking decisions and taking actions. But when we're paralyzed and we don't move, when we inhibit our action, that's when we go into anxiety. That's when we go into depression. So stay busy, stay active, redecorate, change things around, clear out clutter, whatever it is, but keep doing, keep making decisions, what I call little dares. DARES is one of my famous acronyms: decisions, actions, risks, expression, self-love.
I love
So
that.
do some DARES
Excellent.
every day.
Stefan Ben Sassan, Sai Sante, many, many thanks. You're a dear friend, but you're a great healer. We thank you for your time. This will be watched, I think, more than any other of our programs, and it's going to help people. And to all of you, our viewers, our readers, enjoy this. Thank you for being here. Good day and good luck.
Thank you all. Thank you, Beryl.
Pleasure.
Blessings.